Welcome to the third session of the webinar series, Urban-Rural Linkages in the Time of Covid-19, small towns and intermediate cities. My name is Camilo Romero. I'm based in Berlin, and I am part of the UN-Habitat Urban-Rural Linkages team. Sorry, can you hear me?
Ciao, Camilo.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Sorry, I just received a message. Okay, so I'm going to continue. So I was saying that my name is Camilo Romero. I'm based in Berlin, and I am part of the UN-Habitat Urban-Rural Linkages team. Our team belongs to the Policy, Legislation, and Governance section of the Urban Practices branch at UN-Habitat. I would like to thank you to my colleagues, José, Sunlei, and Alice José, who are part of this team and supporting the organization of this webinar. Today, I'm going to be monitoring the chat box, reading your inputs, and transmitting your questions to our speaker and moderator. Grace Gidiri will moderate this meeting. Grace is project officer at the Policy, Legislation, and Governance section. In the case of any technical issue, please choose Alice José as recipient in the chat box and drop her a message. I'm just going to share.
Of goods, capital. Secondly, we'll also be looking at interventions in small and intermediate cities in this time of COVID, how these interventions are being carried out in various contexts and as will be shared by the presenters. And finally, how strong urban-rural linkages could ensure that small and intermediate cities impacts of COVID-19 in small and intermediate cities are tackled well. So today we will be having 4 presenters. Alice, please, you could project for me the 4 presenters that we'll be having today. The first one will be Mr. Edmundo Werna, who is a senior level urbanist at International Labour Organization. He'll be presenting and sharing on the case of Mozambique. Secondly, we'll be having José Enrique, who is the head of Regional and Rural Policy Unit at Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which is OECD. Thirdly, we'll be having Ms. Ellen van Selm, who is the mayor of Opsterland in Netherlands. And finally, we'll be having Ms. Fidoz, who is a special advisor to the Secretary General at UCLG, World Secretariat Barcelona. So we really hope that we'll have a great session together in the next 90 minutes. And for now, I would like to invite the head of the Policy, Legislation, and Governance section, Remy Sechiping, who will be giving the opening remarks. Over to you, Remy.
Thank you, Grace. Welcome everybody to this third edition of this webinar on urban-rural linkages in the time of COVID. This particular series important for us to stress the fact that urban-rural linkages are one of the means for us to connect many things, including policies, legislation, governance, planning, food, and in this case, health. And many of you are interested in the role of small and intermediate city and how they are actually been playing a key role or in connecting, especially when it comes to flows of people and services, how the role of small and intermediate cities is so critical in this trying time. We think that urban-rural linkages are not just connectors of people, but also places. They are also a connector of the social dimensions, economic and environmental dimension of the sustainable development. It's also critical for us to look into how small and intermediate cities, especially in the South, are coping or are managing this type of crisis. We at UN-Habitat, as some of you know, urban-rural linkages feature very well in the global agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals, in the new urban agenda, and it also very critical, as some of you might already aware, how the guiding principle on urban-rural linkages and its action framework articulate the role of intermediate cities. In the same vein, we had different initiative products that are supporting or advancing these programs, including in about 10 countries, some instruments that we have developed that we are using. In this particular seminar we had, or webinar, we had understood the importance of embracing this the notion of intermediate and small towns, not only in terms of population size, but also considering some of the key elements which are the function that the city play, some of the administrative or legal definition of what constitutes intermediate or small towns is not also one size fits all. It's also about, again, the place or geography, the footprint of that particular space we are dealing with, and of course the capacity of a particular settlement to deal with such crises. So just to underscore that for us, we don't see small towns or intermediate cities just in terms of population size, but in that complex nucleus of functions, of country specificities, of footprints, of capacity that define really what may mean. So I want you to keep the definition or understanding of small and intermediate city more agile in the context of health, and in this particular discussion on the COVID-19 and how they have been setting up. We have already mentioned who will be speaking. They are being carefully selected to give more geographically wide perspective from ILO, UCLG, and some example from the Netherlands. So this is a way for us to ensure that we have a broader perspective as much as possible to bring this issue really at the level of the attention that it requires. So I leave it to the presenters to entertain us, to train us, to get us to know a bit more of what is happening in their area of work. So thank you, Grace, back to you.
Thank you so much, Remy. For now, we'd like to invite Mr. Edmundo, who will be sharing on the case of Mozambique. Mr. Edmundo, I don't know if you're connected and your presentation
yes,
you're able to project.
I am connected. Can you hear me?
Yes, sure, we can hear you. Are you able to project, or at least is assisting you?
Yeah, I will try to share my screen. Okay, so give me 1 second. Well, it share what? Well, there are. Okay, can you see?
Yes.
Can you see a slide?
Yes, we can see.
Okay,
yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so thank you again for this opportunity. Good afternoon. I have a long history of cooperation with UN-Habitat and others who are here. I'm going to present a development initiative. This is an ILO project with partners in Mozambique. For those who are not familiar with the ILO, it is one of the agencies of the United Nations, and its focus is on livelihoods, employment, and income generation. So that's the end goal. There are two types of projects. let's say, related to COVID-19. One is that when after the pandemic started, many different agencies started to design projects to address the pandemic. The second type is the initiatives which were already ongoing. And so they had to have changes, to make changes so that they could continue. What I'm going to present is in the second type. So this is an initiative on horticulture and catering value chain in Mozambique using a systemic approach. It was already ongoing when the pandemic started. So we had to make a lot of changes and a lot of efforts to keep it going. So it's an ongoing project in times of COVID. So my presentation is really grounded on what is happening now, more than let's say a conceptual approach, although of course I'm going also to talk about concepts. Let's see, yes, the second slide, for some reason I can't, yes, okay, so now, yes, it's better now. The second slide is just the names of the colleagues to give credit to. These are the people in the main ILO team working in the initiative. Of course, there are many others and many partners. And basically, it is a project, as I mentioned, that it is well, I mentioned the value chain. The idea is to link local rural production with to local urban consumption into small settlements that to start with. Later on, we're going to go to other settlements as well. We are using a systemic approach that, well, it's going too far, too fast. We are using a systemic approach that we call it market system development. Basically, it involves facilitating change that improves the way that markets work for the poor, rather than directly deliver solutions. But I'm not going to enter into the detail. Before talking about COVID, I have to explain a little bit the projects to you. So the problem to address is lack of participation of the producers in the catering value chain. The geographic area are two small towns in Mozambique, Vilanculo and Inhasoro. The objectives are those which are shown in the slide. Improve access to catering market for local producers, more than half women, and increase their income, create new jobs, and supply-demand linkage in the same territory, and strengthen these linkage and strengthen the local economy. This slide shows the issues which relate to the program of UN-Habitat. So to make the linkage with what UN-Habitat is interested in, improving urban-rural linkages, territorial economic development and employment, environmental sensitivity, and empowering people and communities. So the project deals with all these issues. Sorry. To give a bit more information on details, we have the stakeholders or the producers trained in small business associations, so they can become small business associations. The producers and the extensionists are trained in good agricultural practice as well. We have a partnership with one private company, an agro-business company called Asia Agrario, that works with the group identified of producers to do all these issues which are noted in the bottom part of the slide. The technical assistance, inputs, field demonstration of new innovative agricultural techniques, processing center, market linkages, and a match between demand and supply. Remember that what we are doing is to promote the private sector. So we continue now, and the idea for the future is to continue to provide technical support to ASE Agrarios to achieve the objectives via ASE Agrarios. We give support to ASE Agrarios, and via ASE Agrarios support to the producers, support jobs fairs in Inhambane and Vilanculos, and then we also plan to expand the model to other areas of the province and other provinces. Finally, design and intervention in other segments of the catering and tourism value chain, because these areas are very touristic areas, such as skills and working conditions for the restaurant and hotel employees. This is the plan for the future. These are some pictures just to illustrate what we are doing. They show training, they show a little bit of very very hot and dry area. And by the way, even the construction of the shades and the greenhouse are doing with local materials and also providing employment for the local people. But then enter COVID-19. And from now on, the slides present what the initiative is doing and will do to adapt to COVID-19. Well, the ILO deal, as I said, the entrance point of the ILO is on income, livelihoods, and employment. That's the mandate of the agency. And we work in times on, let's say, normal times, business as usual, but we also work in times of crisis. This slide shows, as an example, 3 publications, 3 guides for businesses in times of crisis. The first one on the left is difficult to read, but it is a publication, a guide for small and medium enterprises in times of crisis. The second one in the middle, multi-hazard business continuity management. And the third one on the right is for influenza pandemics, how for enterprise to continue their business during a influenza pandemic. These are just examples. I could mention more, but you can also find other examples in the ILO website. So this slide summarizes the concrete and specific actions that we are doing to keep the business going, to keep the initiative going. Of course, there is no magic bullet. There is no one size fits all. Each case is a case. In our case in Vilanculos and Niasur of this project, first of all, we have a business continuity plan for the producers that based on the materials that I showed to you. The business are already going, and our idea was to expand the business, but it's difficult to expand now, but at least we managed them to keep going. We also did a partnership with a financial institution of the government financial institution called GAPI, and they will provide emergency and short-term equipment for the greenhouses and shadows as well, on a demand basis to help the continuity. The second point is, I'm sure that it's being done in many other cases is that, well, we had a lot of training for the producers, and now we have online training. It has been a challenge because you saw the pictures. They are very humble people in rural areas and peri-urban areas, but very poor, very humble producers. But anyway, we are doing audio tutorials, videos will come on the global good agricultural practices. We also have partnerships with other partners to produce materials to be broadcasted in TV, radio, and also given to the extension officers that can bring computers to, or to at least lend computers and tablets to the producers. We also have a number of manuals, a number of materials on the gender equality, which is very important to the project. Number 3, access to market information. Again, we have to resort to IT. So the business service providers have been equipped with tablets and internet connection that should increase the information and keep the flow of market information. For OSH, occupational safety and health for the producers, this is obvious, and it's very important as well that the producers are well informed about how they can continue to produce and to interact with intermediaries and with end buyers in a safe way. So this is also now part of the project. Number 5, code of practice to combat harassment and violence in times of COVID-19. I don't know about other countries, but I hear that there has been an increase in harassment and violence, especially against women, because of confinement. But this has happening in Mozambique as well. So we are also addressing this in the project in times of COVID. Number 6, transportation of the products. Again, to avoid contamination and to sell the products are sold directly to the buyers. One issue that is not part of our initiative is the public markets, that it is part of the value chain, but it's not part of our initiative. And this indeed needs to be addressed. And we can talk about it later if you want. We have ideas, we have suggestions, but we are not working with private markets because we produce directly to the producers, to the buyers. When I say we, is the initiative, it's not the ILO which is selling. And in the beginning, we targeted tourism businesses, mainly hotels and restaurants in Vilanculo and Nyasoro, because they are two tourist centers in Mozambique. Now, with the whole thing of lockdown and no flights, no nothing, the tourism has decreased a lot. So we also helped to expand the market into other areas. There are a few large-scale companies dealing with gas in the region, so they are now the main buyers of the products, but the population which lives there is also buying from the local producers, and in a way, they also help to keep the initiative going. So this in a nutshell, that's what I wanted to explain to you. As I said, there is no magic bullet. Each case is a case, but what I am presenting to you is something very, very concrete. That's what is happening now. As I'm speaking to you, it is happening in Vilanculos and in Nyasoro. So thank you for your time, and I'm available for questions and comments when the time comes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edmundo. we are grateful for the awesome experience from Mozambique. And from your presentation, of course, we have seen the issue of food coming out clearly, and the need for digitalization in these times of COVID, even when it comes to food producers linking to the being linked to the market. So I would like to encourage us to keep ourselves muted so that we do not interrupt the presenters. But also, in case you have any question, please post in the chat box and direct it to the panelist or presenter that you would like to respond to the particular question, because we'll be having two presentations and then we'll be having a few questions if you will have posted in the chat box. The other thing is in case you have some interesting maybe experiences from where you're from, you can maybe post in the chat box, or you could contact Camilo Romero, who contacted us or invited us to the webinar, and probably we could discuss further. We see representations from Africa, from Europe, from America, and we are so grateful that you were able to join us. Even from Asia, we have representation from India. So we are excited to have all of you today. So I'd like to invite Mr. José Enrique, I hope I'm pronouncing it well, who is our second presenter. Over to you, José.
Thank you very much, Grace, for the introduction. And I too will try to see if I can share my presentation. So hopefully that will work as well. Okay. Is it okay? Can you see now?
Yes. Yes, we can see,
good.
But you can put in slideshow.
Yes, I'll do that in short. Greetings from Paris, and good morning to the Latin American speakers. Good evening to the Asians. Here in France is a day of Ascension, so it's a vacation day, but with much pleasure I can contribute to this very interesting webinar. I had the chance to become involved and very familiar with the guiding principles of urban and rural linkages that Remy mentioned before. At the OECD, we've also been working a lot with some principles. We developed some principles on urban policy, some principles on rural policy, and we have one principle that combines both of them, that addresses this notion of linkages, so to say. What I will try to do today is to break down my presentation into two parts. One is to show you some analysis we have done, and actually this analysis is still not public, so you will be one of the early birds to see it, that we make use of a new definition that can give us some interesting insights about urban and rural linkages. And this analysis was done during the global financial crisis, or during the shock of 2008 until a couple of years ago. So there's some interesting insights on the effects of this crisis and the implications that it might have right now with the current COVID-19 crisis. And then my second part, I'll try to talk about some of the initiatives that we're seeing are being put in place to address the effects of the crisis, with important implications on the topic of urban and rural. So just to start off, the new definition that we have used is based on the concept of functionality. And at the OECD, we've developed a global definition of what we call functional urban areas. These are the big cities and the areas of influence. And then the problem that we have is that outside of these functional urban areas, we have territories. And the linkages between these two is difficult to capture when we just look at the functional urban area. So what we did is we try to merge both concepts, and we develop a definition that essentially classifies all the territories across the OECD according to 5 categories. So the first one is if you have more than half of the population living in metropolitan areas, and then we divide these into what we call large cities and very large cities, and large cities, very large, meaning above 1 million. Large is about 250,000. And then if about less than half, 50% of the population doesn't live in these functional urban areas, we use a second criteria, which is based on accessibility. So if you're close to a big city, you're classified as this type of region. If you're close to a medium-sized city, you're classified according to this classification. And then we have the remote areas. And this allows us to disentangle what we call the urban and rural linkages between places that are close to a big city and places that are close to like a medium-sized city. That's the interesting part about this analysis. When we look at the distribution across the OECD, we have about 42% of the population live in large cities, 29 regions inside of a functional urban area city. Then about 12% of territories near a large city, about 9% near territories of a small city, and then about 8% of remote. And what's interesting is that when we look at the degree of rurality, we find these three categories have different degrees of rurality. So the concept of urban and rural linkages is really associated to these three regions, whether you're connected to a big city, you have a high degree of rurality, but also if you're connected to a medium and intermediate city, you also have a high degree of rurality. Only the large metro regions and the remote places, you find a bit of this dichotomy. So looking at the population trends, we see that there's a population growth in the categories that have these part of this metropolitan regions. In all OECD countries, they've gained population in these types of regions, and only one country has gained in the non-metropolitan types of regions. And then we see that when we compare the regions that are close to a large city, they face much less population declines than what we find with a region that is close to a medium-sized region and a remote. For example, in the remote, about 1/4 of the countries are losing population, and the same is true with the regions that are close to a medium-sized city. So from the start, we see very different population dynamics between the two types of regions close to the cities, between the large and the medium-sized. And if we do dig a little bit deeper, we see that aging is a challenge across the non-metropolitan regions, in particular the remote places. But what's interesting is that we find much higher net migration rates in those territories close to the large cities and the large ones, as opposed to the remote regions and the regions near a medium-sized city. So you do see the effects of these large regions in attracting people, not just to the functional urban areas themselves, but also to the places adjacent to them. Now, if we look at the effects of the crisis, we find that before the crisis, the remote regions and the regions close to the medium-sized cities were converging. They were growing much, much faster than the large cities. But the effects of the crisis, which is the bubble, the filled up places, they've fallen all the way down with much lower growth rates. So the bubbles below is the growth rates from 2008 to 2017, and the ones that are on the top are from before the crisis. So you do find the crisis had a big effect on these remote places and the regions close to intermediate and small cities. The big cities, they've become much more resilient to the crisis, and also the rural close to the big cities. So we do find that recovery is associated with large cities, you know, not just the cities themselves, but also the territories that are close to them. So some takeaways about this current crisis: we are expected that the larger cities, right now everybody is suffering, but we do expect that they will bounce back quicker. And it's the territories that are more vulnerable and close to the intermediate cities that will have a bigger effect as the crisis unfolds to them. We also know that some of these low density areas, they have less access to medical services, testing facilities, and medical equipment. They also have a higher share of population at risk. That means elderly, and they have less access to digital infrastructures. Something that is very interesting across the OECD that we're asking ourselves, what we've seen is that many people have left the big cities towards more low densely populated areas. And we call this sort of like an urban penalty to try to induce self-isolation. So the question that we have is, some of these new norms that they call that is more remote distributive work, be able to telework more often, get access to some of these services in remote ways. Will that really change the demographic patterns and also the linkages between urban and rural? We expect it will, and we expect that these linkages will be strengthened. They will become much stronger. Then what we also find is that perhaps some of these medium and small cities can really benefit from some of the better services. We expect many countries to start investing in some of these digital technologies. So we do think that this can be very, very beneficial to some of these intermediate and medium-sized cities. We've also seen there's a strengthening of these local networks and cooperative structures in some of these remote areas. So this is also quite interesting too, that is evolving of how some of these civic society has come together during the COVID-19 crisis and in order to face not this shock, but in terms of the future shocks. So in terms of what we're doing at the OECD, we've been producing a number of these policy notes. We produced one on SMEs, one on cities, one on tourism. And we're about to release a policy note on what are the responses from the rural side, which have strong implications with the urban and rural linkages. And what we have seen is that there's about 4 types of actions across the OECD. One, countries are already investing in what they call digital infrastructure and improving the accessibility in rural areas. From Korea and Poland, they're putting in place special loan guarantee systems to better promote or better connect some of these remote places to make sure that also some of these areas enjoy from the digital infrastructure. Second, we've seen a lot of initiatives to maintain basic services in some of these remote areas. So it's keeping up the electricity bills, the water sanitation, food aid, all these kinds of things. Third, we've seen some actions that are trying to support rural businesses and workers, anything around SMEs, anything around tourism, mining. So there's a number of interesting measures that have been put in place. Then there's been a lot of initiatives trying to help mobilize local networkers and healthcare providers, network of doctors going to some of these smaller towns and trying to also provide access of medical equipment to some of these areas. And then what we think is that these are 5 broad areas of policy that we think the crisis can provide to some of these medium-sized cities. The first one is the speed up of digital infrastructure. We think that countries are going to really jump on these digital bandwagon. And here we're not just talking about just putting fiber optic cables or broadbands, but also supporting the ecosystem, training people how to use some of these digital solutions and how to deliver services. We expect also a lot of initiatives to encourage the uptake of remote services. And here we're also talking about provision of public services, for example, e-services to do your paperwork and governments. We've seen a lot of examples where some of these remote places are enjoying better access to a lot of these paperwork through remote measures. I mentioned before the support of the community-based and social innovation projects are emerging. This is something quite interesting. We also think that it's important not to forget the sustainability agenda. So we might face a danger that a lot of governments are trying to address the effects of COVID-19 and putting aside the transition to a low carbon economy that is very, very critical to keep on enhancing. And then we also expect a number of policies looking at how to make some of these smaller places more resilient against future shocks. So these are just some insights that I just wanted to share with you of what the thinking is within our group here at the OECD. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. José. It's an interesting presentation showing some of the initiatives that could be undertaken in small and intermediate cities in times of COVID. So I don't see many questions from the chat box. So probably we will proceed to the third presentation, and then we'll keep checking the chat box. Please ensure you indicate whom you have addressed the question to. So, Miss Hélène, are you there?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you. Alice is assisting with the projection.
Alice is assisting, okay. Thank you very much. Yes, this is the first proof of cooperation is that in some country, I don't know where, someone is presenting you my slides. So thank you very much, Alice, for doing that. My name is Ellen van Selm. I'm the mayor of Opsterland, municipality in the Netherlands. Today is a public holiday as well, as Enrique was explaining. We have beautiful weather here. Dus in spite of the COVID crisis, we see a lot of people outside cycling and enjoying the nice weather here. I will explain in this presentation a bit how we are coping with the COVID crisis, especially how we as a rural municipality connect to the current pandemic, and also how we cooperate with the cities. I hope my internet connection is stable enough, because that's one of the takeaways I want to make in the end, that it is necessary to have a stable internet connection. And that's not always the case. I thank you very much for the presentation. I feel very honored to meet you and connect with you around the globe in this way, in spite of, or maybe thanks to the COVID crisis. I used to work in my former career in the international cooperation, for example, in Pakistan, in the social forestry sector, and the participatory approaches that we use there is really a big advantage in my work here today in the Netherlands as a mayor. Can you please give the, this is a map of the Netherlands. You see, I want to indicate where we are. This is the map of the Netherlands. Opsterland is my municipality, is in the north of the Netherlands, in the province of Friesland. And Friesland is a mainly rural area. The main sectors are tourism and agriculture. And as you can see, the Opsterland is a municipality with about 30,000 inhabitants. We're divided into 16 villages. And we have quite, for this amount of inhabitants, we have quite a large territory. We used to have one of the, we used to be one of the largest communities in territory-wise. That makes that we have a lot of space here, and that's also one of the key issues in my contribution today. In the Netherlands, we have a network that's called P10, and that is a network of the 22 largest rural municipalities. And I am chairing this network, and these communities are located in the periphery of our country, large territories, municipality with only villages and no urban centers. This P10 network aims at developing and sharing knowledge, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, lobbying. And for that reason, I'm also a board member of the Dutch network of municipalities. And there I met in that UN-Habitat in Durban last year. If you can give the next slide, please. Yeah, these are the numbers of the COVID crisis at the moment. If you can see, Netherlands is relatively heavily affected by the crisis. We have about, on a total of 17 million inhabitants in the Netherlands as a whole, we have around 44,000 confirmed cases. That means that these people were tested and confirmed with the COVID-19 virus. Not everybody can have a test, so this is an underrepresentation. We expect that the total of positively tested, positive people with COVID virus is much higher. There are 11,500 in hospitals, these are not all, the people are not all of them are in the intensive care, but these are the complete numbers. And in total, more than 5,500 people died of COVID. And these are last week's figures, as you can see. In Friesland, however, my province, we have a lot less patients. We have, as you can see, 577 in Friesland, and in my community, in my municipality, 23. We had the first confirmed patient with COVID in my municipality, so we had a lot of press attention, the first in my province, I have to say. And that means that we are very much aware of the risks and impact of COVID. And we have a very deliberate policy how to deal with it. On the one hand, we do not have a lot of patients, but the impact on social and economic life is much bigger because of the restrictions related to the lockdown we have here. And we call it, our Prime Minister introduced the term intelligent lockdown, and I will come back to it later. In the table below, you can see that the peak of the hospitalized people was end of March, beginning of April. So now it is a quite stable period with much less infections. The next, please. Yeah. About the governance structure dealing with COVID in the Netherlands is at national level. Measures are issued based on technical information, analysis and expertise from our highly qualified healthcare institutions. And that's, I like to stress that because it's not, these are not political decisions, but our Prime Minister says once and again that it's all based on facts and figures and advisors from expertise centers. At this level, there is decided to implement a so-called intelligent lockdown on March the 12th. And this intelligent lockdown means that inhabitants are expected to think for themselves what can be done and what can't be done. However, there are a lot of measures issued, and I will come back to this when we see the national approach. Its aim is to protect vulnerable groups and make sure the healthcare system can cope. That means flatten the curve, which is a worldwide slogan at the moment, is also used here, that we do want to have our health system prepared to help all the patients. Few examples on the regional level. Yes, I was at the top of this slide. We have so-called security regions, and these security regions are normally organizing emergency service like fire brigades, etc. And now, at the moment, they act as supervisory bodies of the implementation of the national policy. On local level, there we are responsible for supervision and enforcement of the measures. A few examples of those national measures are, and I'm sure you know them, personal hygiene measures, social distancing, 1.5 meters, schools are closed, working at home, no use of public transport unless necessary. And exactly in this time, where you see the curve of the peak of the hospitalized people are already weeks behind us, we are changing the policy and downgrading some measures. For example, some schools reopen now for children under 12. Restaurants and cafes will open in June with a maximum of 30 visitors. Contact professions, such as hairdressers, etc., they start working again. And now we hear that at national level, to monitor all these data and the consequences of gradually opening up the society, we are developing a kind of national corona dashboard. And you might know early warning systems, and we like to introduce a kind of early warning system to monitor as close as possible the impact of loosening or tightening restrictions. Okay, this is what the regional and local approach is in my province. We have a weekly meeting of all the mayors in this province, which are 16, to see if all the, to monitor the COVID cases and see if all the measures are, how the compliance is and if we have to change our policy. Okay, this is about the governance. If you can go to the next one. About urban-rural linkages, the topic of these webinar sessions. We can say that in the Netherlands and in Europe and worldwide, we have a joint focus on keeping the virus and the economic consequences under control. In our country, there is an appeal on solidarity, and that's why you can, so that we protect vulnerable groups together. I explained we have regional differences in the extent we are affected by the virus. In my rural province, we have more impact of the intelligent lockdown than that we have actual confirmed cases. So we do have large economic consequences, inhabitants losing jobs, people lose feeling of meaningful lives, loss of social structures, and all those consequences we see. So that's one of the differences in what the previous introducer said, less densely, areas with less densely populated. We see the same here, that solidarity is asked, but we have so much space that it's very easy to keep the social distancing. The crowd management, this is my first point, is very different than in a rural area. It's easier for us than in cities. The second point is that in my municipality, there's a reduction of compliance with all the restrictions because the sense of urgency is becoming less. And that's something I as a mayor has to observe and also see what we can do in terms of measurements. The last point is the impact of the agriculture sector. In my preparation, we had some context about that. We can't say anything about the agricultural sector at the moment. As far as I can see, the export is not very much affected yet, but I'm sure on the long run that will be will help to improve the focus on local circular economy, also in the agricultural sector. On the other hand, the Netherlands is well known for its efficient way of production. And we will see in the long run what will be the result of this crisis. The access to food and other resources is not affected in our country, not here in the countryside, but also not in the cities. Although the number of people that lost their jobs and have to rely on charity food supply, soup kitchens, food bank, increases quickly and has at the moment enormous numbers, which is really a novum at this time in the Western world. I like to conclude. I have this example in Opsterland, one-way routing. This is something in public space that it is for us very easily to ask people to cooperate with us, to say the chance of infection is much less if you go hiking than you do it in a one-way matter. And if you think yourself how you can walk, for example, walk clockwise, then it's easier to avoid other people and to avoid infections. And that helps a lot. And this was a kind of a novum that I was on the national television with, and it works here in our national parks. and it's not to be enforced because that's impossible, but on the other hand, people do that themselves. So I want to conclude with my last slide. What did we learn so far on rural and in our rural municipality? We see that the implementation of the COVID measures is based on trust that our citizens will comply because they see our communal interest, our common interest. This is, however, our regular attitude, also because we simply don't have sufficient enforcement capacity and not enough police officers. So we can't enforce anyone who's walking outside. So what we hope and what we ask from our inhabitants is that they comply themselves, and because they also see the reason and why we have to be in this lockdown. What's also remarkable in this case is that the government at all levels emphasize and praise the majority of people that comply. This is a very positive attitude of our politicians on all levels. We stress the positive behavior. I might have to make the remark that a mayor is not a political function in the Netherlands. So I'm beside of the political system. The leadership that is shown is more on good practices than on fining and enforcement. Second is also said by the previous introducer that mobility is one of the key problems to be solved. It should be monitored very carefully because we do want to keep our touristic sector alive, but we cannot have too many visitors when the lockdown comes to an end. And we have seen that in Spain and Italy as well, that the pull factors of the countryside in times of crisis are enormously, and at the moment we cannot handle it. So the problem we are discussing at the moment is how to regulate mobility. The third is that I'm convinced that the space in our rural areas offer solutions and opportunities when we have to redesign our society, go to the new normal based on social distancing and the 1.5 meter economy. Most of the time, these big areas and territories are seen as a problem, but I think that at the moment they're more a solution than a problem. The fourth is, I started my intervention with it as well. Stable and fast internet is a basic condition for the rural areas playing a role in a new reality of social distancing. Youth and anyone who wants to work or communicate needs internet at the moment. So it's also in the Netherlands, it's speeding up because also in our country, there are places in my municipality in particular where we have very slow access and bad coverage of internet. And last is more a thing that we are discussing and rethinking at the moment. It might be the case that this crisis offers opportunities for redesigning the food chain from the perspective of sustainability. Local production and consumption is stimulated. We want to help our entrepreneurs in the villages and also our local farmers. So it might stimulate the circular economy in the long run. Well, that's my contribution. Thank you very much for the moment, and I might come back later to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ellen, for the interesting presentation again. I think I'll go to the next presenter because I see we have 30 minutes to go, and I'm hoping she can stick to 10 minutes so that we can address the questions and hear from the discussants as well. So Ms. Fredos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, everyone. I would like first to thank you for the invitation. I feel here we are in a kind of family between institutions, as we are. First, I'm after a local government, which for us is very important. We are in a network of local government. And OECD and ILO are partners we are currently always working with. So I'm glad to be here and sharing about the topic. Will I have the host to present my presentation? Can I have the hand on it? Okay. Well, if it's an issue, we can go with the one you have. It's not a problem. I just wanted to avoid the pass on, please. Okay. Okay. So just to begin, maybe I should say that in UCLG we have a forum. We have different forums, but a forum specific on intermediary cities. And we had a first World Forum on intermediary cities in 2018. And I will begin just making a little introduction of what are intermediary cities for us. Please, can you go to the next one? So the definition for us, it was decided that it is not about the number of inhabitants and population in the intermediary cities. For us, from UCLG, it is really a question of intermediation in the development of the territory. So we are talking about governance, we are talking about economic flows, we're talking about social flows, and also everything that could generate a more sustainable development in the territory. Please. So this map actually is in blue. We have intermediary cities, and in red, metropolis. And the first thing we went to say 2 years ago to OECD is that intermediary cities are not secondary cities. Please we have a problem with our local governments feeling that they are secondary in the importance first. And secondly, when we see the mass of intermediary cities in the world, and this is what we are working on, a mass of intermediary cities, not only a question of having one here and one there. It is a unique potential in the planet for sustainability at global level. So for us, at the beginning, we were counting intermediary cities beginning at 50,000, but actually after the World Forum, and this map is previous to the World Forum, we decided it was not a question of inhabitants. Today, we can say in Spain, for example, their intermediary cities are beginning at 20,000 inhabitants. In Morocco, it is a little bit the same. In China, an intermediary cities will be 3-4 millions of inhabitants. This depends on the urban structure of the country. We can see that in Europe, many of the intermediary cities, many of the cities in Europe are entering in this kind of schemes and structure. So here we can see what are intermediary cities as a potential in the world. We will come back to this later on. Please, the next one. So for us, from UCLG, we believe that the urban world needs the structure of the cities to get organized and to organize this implementation for sustainability. For us, it is clear that it cannot be done without the urban. But when we say that, we are not saying the rural is not there. We are saying this can be a real support to encompass sustainability and join the rest of the territory with it, as we see the intermediary cities as being this intermediation in the territory. So cities, no, please, I'm not done, thank you. Cities, through strategic planning, citizens, each one of us are beneficiary, but also responsible as citizens. And also the democratic participation, which is key for intermediary cities, because intermediary cities for some country, especially for the global south, if we still can say something like that, are levers of democracy. Please, the next one. So the positioning adopted in Habitat 3, it was that through the SDGs, go on please, one after the other, yeah. Through the SDGs and for the planet sustainability and climate, we need to avoid the disasters by rethinking our cities, which is the new urban agenda. This is how we are articulating the different agendas for intermediary cities, and the local governments are ready to take their role and responsibilities. Please, the next one. So we had in 2018 the Charter of Intermediary Cities of the World, where the question of the rural-urban linkages was highlighted as one of the key questions by the local governments. Through these linkages, we are aware, and local governments are aware, that we can keep the human values, that we are talking about living systems of the territory. We are not talking about a urban and a rural, we talk about living systems. We strengthen the systems of local solidarity, and we try to empower the quality of life and make it resilient and sustainable through the access to basic services in the territories. And of course, for us, the rural side and the linkages are strongly linked to what is identity, culture, and traditions. Please, the next one. Let's go to the next one. Those are just points highlighted in the charter. I will put it in the chat later on so everyone can have access easily. So now going to the COVID. We had, in UCLG, we have been organizing two, what we call LLEs, live learning experiences with local governments. Since the beginning of the lockdown, here in Barcelona, it was on the 13th of, the last day was the 13th of March, and we are still in the phase 0 in Barcelona specifically. So we have seen, it has been the occasion the opportunity to make consultations with the local governments, how they are living the COVID exactly, and what were the agendas that were really at stake for the benefits of the citizens. So a general situation was that what were known as being challenges before in the intermediary cities were beginning to be really big, strong challenges. I mean, when we talk about the social and economic resilience, now today we are talking about possible and potential unrest, social unrest. When we talk about the social gap, we talk about inequalities. When we talk about we were talking last week, sorry, about the rural linkages with the metropolis, and saying it appeared clear also that the metropolis with density of the people did generate a crowding environment for the contamination. Well, it's not that much the case in intermediary cities. However, if there is one or two cases, the whole city is down, because there is this strong feature of humanity, solidarity, and proximity that are in intermediary cities and small cities. But some key challenges have been identified. Please, the next one. First, the economic resilience at stake. We have seen that the economic survival is at stake with the lockdown. The relations between the rural and the urban life cannot be cannot continue being what they are because of the lockdown, and because we need to avoid what we call physical distancing in UCLG. We talk about physical distancing and social closeness, because it is a question of saying we are still there and we are there and the people are together, but the physical distancing is necessary. Also, the circular economy and virtuous circles of economy, which is very important. Those have been really impacted because of the lockdown. So they try to have a kind of a kind of structure to make it more efficient. Actually, we have seen that municipalities are trying to reorganize the food security and the food systems to ensure that the rural side and the agriculture can continue living, but without taking a maximum of cautions. The proximity and the human side is being a key feature is playing a key role in the intermediary cities, allowing a better solidarity as well, and an easier one because of the proximity. We have seen that markets that were before 3 times a week in the city, now they are like 1 time a week in a special neighborhood, and mobilizing the different markets, public markets in different neighborhoods each time to ensure that everyone has access, to ensure that the rural products are able to be sold, but the normal flow is not there for the lockdown. So the exchanges from the city to the rural are reduced because of the lockdown. But we know also that municipalities have quickly organized structures for banks of food to help these economic complex situations. Also, I would like just to remind the fact that the intermediary cities is about a life rhythm. We talk about life systems with the territory, together with the territory and the villages around. This is why these rural-urban linkages are key in all the intermediary cities' life. Please, the next one. The human resilience in the rural life has been mainly worked out by the public services. And the public services have not been able to generate and provide the normal services they do to the rural and to the urban, but they try. It has been blocked because they were not able to support anymore the cooperatives, to support the basic services they were bringing before, the mobile equipment when there is questions of health, and also the goods of first and primary necessity. This human resilience has been put at stake for sure. The third, please, the next one. The next point is about trauma. Trauma, we have felt that through all the consultations done with intermediary cities, there is a kind of social cohesion that has been put at stake for 2 reasons. First, the economic complexity. They have been living for the lockdown. They are not sure when, how, with which means there will be. There will be reopening and continuing their economic life. And the second one is intermediary cities have always been lacking of equipment and services, sometimes from talking about big hospitals, talking about, and this fear of saying, if I'm contaminated, how I will ensure I have a health service that could save me or save my parents or save my children. And we felt this kind of trauma, and it's not dependent on the countries, it is general, whether they are from a European country, whether they are from the South or America or Asia. It is something that was constant, and we believe somehow it's something we will have to work out. Migration in a double direction as well, because we had first feedbacks for a migration from intermediary cities to metropolis, fearing the lack of health equipment. They prefer to go quickly before they close the lockdown, and in case, and they have been pushing for that. And also from the metropolis to intermediary cities, looking for a more healthy life. And this has happened a lot. Linking this urban life to its rural linkages, of course, in the imaginary of the people, and it is true, although it has been reduced during the lockdown. And also a topic that was very important is the digital factor. it has become a kind of factor of exclusion, because not everywhere in intermediary cities around the world people were able to connect and not be like we are today, connected to any of those. I remember one of the webinars we had from Africa, where they were saying we have been trying to connect, but we have had only these few minutes and we will be out again. And this feeling of loneliness is something that we have felt. But those are all are levers of social resilience. Please, the next one. Go on. Just the human factor, a key thing in intermediary cities because of the citizens' implication, and we count on that for the recovery. The life systems must be the support of social, human, and solidarity economic circles for the intermediary cities. And rural-urban linkages are key at the heart of this dynamic. Also, next one, please. For us, the human value is please. The human value is key, and what we are concerned about is this picture at the right side. My home city is Tangier in Morocco, and we are very used to see this kind of images of people trying to cross to Europe from all Africa, and our concern is to have this massive kind of migrations again in the post-COVID. So it is a question we are taking very seriously. Please, the next one. So today with the, please go on. Today with the COVID, it is a bridge for local government to play their role. And from this disaster we are living, we think that by rethinking our cities and by integrating the SDGs, we will go to the sustainability of the planet we are aiming to. So let's, please, the next one. For us, in UCLG, we are putting the next one. Voila, thank you. We are putting the green recovery as a key thing in our agenda now. And for intermediary cities, they are the key elements for the ecological transition we are aiming to. We have seen many countries, the European Commission and many countries asking for green recovery, trying to rethink the after COVID to try to make better decisions and taking the opportunity of the lockdown. For us, intermediary cities will be key because of the rural-urban linkages in this strategy. They will be at the heart of the survival of the life systems I was explaining a little bit earlier. That is, thank you very much at your availability for any question.
Wow, very rich presentations and insights from Ms. That I hope I don't pronounce it wrongly, Ms. Ferders. So we, for now, we have like 10 minutes and we have so many questions at this chat box. We'll promise you that these questions we'll be sharing with the presenters, and as we'll be sharing back email of appreciation and everything, we will be giving responses to some of the questions that will not be able to respond here. So we are so sorry about that. But for now, we're going to invite a discussant, and we're going to give you exactly 2 minutes. After 2 minutes, we will cut we'll cut you off so that we can have at least 2 discussants before we complete our webinar. So for now, I'd like to invite Ms. Chantal Clement. I don't know if you're here with us. Maximum 2 minutes.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So thank you for the opportunity to speak briefly on this. I'm Chantal Clément. I'm here on behalf of IPES Food, which is the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems. And thank you first to all the presenters for these very interesting presentations that went directly into some concrete opportunities and issues when it comes to the resilience of rural and urban areas in the face of COVID. The thing that I heard the most throughout these presentations as most critical in the current situation is the need for proper infrastructure, things like access to internet and other digital tools as well. And this relates somewhat to the comments I wanted to make. So, of course, the perspective I'm taking is food and agriculture. And we've heard the problems already in terms of access to food, linking producers with markets at this time. And it's becoming really critical for national authorities to accelerate plans to support subnational authorities to be able to ensure food security at the local level, both rural and urban. And I just wanted to point to some examples of this that we're seeing already. I know that mayors are declaring that things like community gardens, open air markets, farmers markets are essential services. Countries are taking actions to bolster domestic food supply. Citizens in many countries are just looking for more direct ways of sourcing their food. But as was raised in many cases, particularly in the global south, in massive informal urban settlements, or for the most vulnerable groups, these measures are not always easy to implement. Sometimes, and they're just not feasible, particularly to reach those most in need. So in parallel to the emergency relief efforts that some of you touched on in terms of food, I think we need to think about what we can build longer term. I appreciated the example from the Netherlands pointing out that the rise in the use of food banks and soup kitchens is increasing. And of course, supporting these kinds of efforts are good as emergency solutions, but I'm hoping to know if governments at the national and subnational level are really setting up anything longer term to create long-term resilience. Because we're going to be faced with these types of outbreaks again in the future, and we really need to start building long-term solutions. So I think knowing that I only have 2 minutes, maybe I'll jump to the end of my thoughts is, I know a number of people have asked this in the chat already, but it would be very important to know if there are, again, these plans to support municipalities in the recovery period and over the longer term to build these resilient local food systems, to ensure access to healthy food for more people, to support this greater push for circular economy, which has come up quite a few times. So again, I think it's really important for us to consider the measures we want to set up to avoid this type of crisis again. And I say this just to end off because I know that at the level of smaller communities, medium-sized communities, that's really where the most innovative change can happen. We've seen this before. And certainly as we heard in the last presentations, these communities hold many of the solutions. So I think it would be particularly opportunistic to really just leverage that in this time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chantal, for your intervention. Now I would like to give the floor to our second discussant, as Hassan Radoine. Please, the floor is yours. You have 2 minutes.
Okay. All right, I'm sorry. I just unmuted my microphone. Do you hear me, Camilo? Hello? Do you hear me?
Loud and clear. Please go ahead.
Okay, so I'm delighted to join this panel. I think it was such wonderful presentations. And I think quite interesting that with this COVID-19, we are actually, I'm being optimist. I think we are repositioning the rural again. And though some presentations, they may look from the urban areas forward to the rural, I think we are now witnessing that we need to change the perspective. We need to look from the rural to the urban, as I will mention at the end. I think there are a lot of opportunities in the rural territories than the urban territories now. I think from the Mozambique case study of the farmers' resilience and the question of the local workforce, and this issue of how to enable local farmers to get to the market, to the OECD experience that Enrique actually stressed on these two key terms for me that were very interesting: functional urban areas and the degree of rurality. Though I am quite hesitant about this question of degree of rurality, why not to say degree of urbanity? Some cities, they are not even urban and they call themselves urban. So this question of degree of urbanity and the rurality, it makes it like we are undermining the rurality just by deciding about its degree. And I think this is the shift of kind of mindset we need to do, that the rural always undermined and the urban is good. So the case of Netherlands, that was a very crystal case. I think it was very interesting from a small rural municipality, how we can learn some lessons, especially participative approach, this local understanding, local trust, and the crowd management, and we could see how mobility is managed among these citizens within this rural municipality. I think cooperation and of course was stated by Ellen that how can we change this crisis to opportunities. I liked very much the question of redesigning the food chain and local and how to pursue sustainability. For UCLG, Firdaus actually, she gave a pertinent presentation, well done, that actually give us a new definition for intermediary cities and what is an intermediary city. Indeed, it's a quite legitimate question. And then how the urban is actually needs for sustainability. And then the question of this intercity connectedness is more about living systems. I really liked this term, living systems, human establishments, metabolism. I don't think this dichotomy of urban and rural will help us. We need to discard this dichotomy of urban-rural and now resort to this question of sustainable, resilient human establishment based on living systems. I like that. So I just, while you're talking, I just wrote my notes. The post-COVID prospects. These are the things I typed in my iPhone while you're presenting. The first thing, actually, there is a shift of paradigms with COVID-19. COVID-19 is revealing the importance of the rural territories, not the opposite. So considering the future of economic challenges, especially with the expected economic recession caused by COVID-19, studies predict that urban poverty
It seems to be that we lost the connection with Hassan Rodini. So we are approaching to the end of our webinar. The time went very fast and we don't have so much time left. So I just would like to ask our speakers to give us in a 2 minutes final comment some of your final takeaways, and also if you want to address one of the questions that were posted in the chat. So I would like to start with Edmundo Werna, please, for your final takeaways of this webinar.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
can you hear
please
me?
Go ahead. Please go ahead.
Yes, okay. I will summarize what has been asked to me. The production now is okay. It is horticulture. It has not been hit by the COVID because of what I've mentioned, but also fortunately we were able to produce equipment in some facilities like shades and greenhouse at the right moment. So the production is going well. I mean, to the extent of the magnitude of the project. The project is in partnership with local authorities in both the municipality, in both towns, and but it is for the promotion of the private sector, but of course the government, the local government is very much involved. So the production so far is protected in terms of the COVID-19 in the areas of the project. They are small towns. They are not, hopefully they will not be, and they are not yet focus of contamination. Things are very well under control, even in the country in general, although of course in the larger areas, Maputo and Palma, things are much more complicated. But there is some level of testing and data. We don't know how much reliable it is, but it's published practically daily. Now, in the future, when the border opens, it will increase, there will be more food coming from South Africa especially, and there will be more customers, but this is the situation. We'll go back to the situation where we were in the beginning of the project, is that we want to convince the local buyers that they can buy from the local producers. Or before COVID, they even imported tomatoes, onions, and eggs from South Africa to Inhambane, which is very far away, you see. So I don't think it's necessary. And then the whole idea of the project is to strengthen the local economy and also to strengthen the local gastronomy, and then with culture coming in. So there will be more food and there will be more customers. And we hope that the producers will not only survive, but thrive in this new situation. Thank you. Over.
Thank you very much, Edmundo. So now I would like to give the floor to José Enrique Garcilazo, our second speaker, to share with us your final takeaways, and if you want to address some of the questions that were posted for you in the chat, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Camila. I would like to draw on what some comments that Professor Hassan Radan mentioned. I think we fully agree that we need to move away from these urban and rural dichotomies. And the way that we have addressed it is to try to develop indicators that can bring these two constituencies together. So I think it's one way is to make sure that we address on the urban sides to say that, you know, your agenda is not just inside of cities, and also on the rural side to make sure that they understand that it's not just about remote places, but what do we do with this mixed territory? That's the largest share of people living across the OECD. And we think that a good start is with indicators that can bring both constituencies together to say these are areas with a high degree of urbanity or rurality. They're mixed, and both policy domains need to coordinate better, and they need to in issues such as spatial planning, mobility, addressing all these common challenges. Just to come up with a couple of questions. I think there's a question about strengthening women's position, and what we see in our analysis is that there's a higher share of women living in urban areas. So we have higher fertility rates in rural, but what happens is throughout the life cycle, women tend to migrate more to cities. So there's a number of initiatives across a lot of these rural places that are trying to, you think about some of these that are losing population, trying to put in place policies that can attract the youth and the women specifically. So we've seen in some traditional sectors such as mining, a big push towards attracting women towards the mining sector, and other more traditional areas. So I think that's an interesting initiative that a lot of these rural policymakers have realized that if you don't bring back the young and the women, you're most likely going to be losing population. Another question around the opportunities of some of this influx that we've seen between people moving from the urban to the rural. And I think what we're trying to do is to change the rural development framework to make it a people-centered one. Traditional, it's a lot about commodities, it's about, you know, agriculture or forestry. And what we're trying to make rural development is to really focus on the individual. And how can we deliver good well-being to the individual? And here we need to also take into account the economic, the service delivery, which is often disconnected from the rural side, and the environmental. So the framework that we're trying to work is with these three bigger domains, and can we really deliver better well-being to rural citizens? So I think that is the key to be able to attract some of these rural citizens and make them stay in some of these rural areas. I think the new normal will change things. I mean, it's still early to find out, but I think there's some important changes that we've seen. One is on the environment. I think the data that is coming out, these big reductions on pollutions in some of the cities that show that we need to move towards more sustainable forms of mobility. I think there's going to be much more teleworking habits after the crisis. People living outside of cities, but maybe commuting once or twice a week. So we need to find out ways to bring some of these people in that is not through a car, or at least a polluting car. So I think this brings a number of interesting insights that also have to do with the urban and rural linkages. And also, how can we make sure that we deliver good services in some of these places? I think that's an area that we've been working around. Of course, the big advantage of some of these rural areas is they have lower housing costs, and that is an opportunity. So if we move in towards more digital services and digital solutions and provide them access to what they had before, I think it can be an important turning point. But this is still early for us to find out. These are just brainstorming. So I'll just leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Enrique, for these insights. Now I would like to move to our third speaker, Ellen van Selm, to share with you your final insights and takeaways.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your nice remarks and comments in the chat. I want to say something about the last remark of the previous speaker. He said the housing opportunities under the condition of good digital services in the rural areas are good, so that might be a complete other society. I think he's right. But another condition is that people who move from cities to the countryside, to villages, is that they get really involved in village life and in also in the community in the villages. And I say that because I know that's one of the conditions to have a lasting effect. I had a few, and I hope to discuss this later on more in detail. I have only one takeaway. I really like it very much to be involved in this discussion. There are a few few participants who asked me about more detailed plans for example, controlling mobility or economic growth, economic development in the rural areas. In the Netherlands, all these plans are still under construction. So I'm in national working groups to share ideas and to make plans, but I must admit that there are no concrete actions. We are really in the action. So we monitor figures and facts on daily basis. And what there is no big picture yet. So we're still making an inventory of what kind of factors should contribute to the new normal. So I hope to be able to share concrete plans in the later phase. Thank you very much to have me here in this webinar, and I wish everybody a nice and good weekend after the Friday still to come. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your final remarks, Ellen. And now we'll go to our fourth speaker, Firdaus Osidum, to share with us your final insights and comments. Please, the floor is yours.
Now, yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Camilo. I think it has been very enriching. I'm so happy to have been participating in this exchange. I think the point of the aging is something we have been thinking about in the work we have been doing. This intergenerational dialogue between the people in the different stages and ages is a key point in our agenda, and especially in intermediary cities in Spain. In Spain, they talk about La España vacía, the empty Spain, because of the intermediary cities not keeping the people in it. It is also a question of brain drain. We have a lot of questions around the question of the aging, and for me, it was a key point. The other point for me that was very important was a term that was used by Edmundo, that was humility, in its sense of the connection, this culture of being connected to nature. I think it's something that is in the heart of what the rural side is. Not that it has to say like that, but because of this living in continuity of nature and not going in against. It's something that was key for me. Also, the food security. I think when we talk about ecological transition, for me, it is a key one. For your information, we are preparing consultations for the Second World Forum of Intermediary Cities. They will begin around the second half of June to prepare the forum that was supposed to be in September, that has been postponed now for the next year. And I'm taking really a lot of good insight for that. And of course, we will be going back to our partners to work on that more deeply. Also, from Chantal Clément, how is put the perspective on this question of the food security and the change of paradigms for us is a key one. So we will be also looking into that in a more detailed way. I came from our mayor, how the structure and how the shift of the paradigm also in the mentalities was quite strong. And I could go for a long time like this with many points that were very important, but we'll be making our own recapitulative points and going back to our partners. So thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Firdaus. So yeah, the webinar has been extended a little bit. Now we are going to continue with the closing remarks by Remy Sietchepin. Please, Remy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Camilo, the team. I think you have been very enriching discussion, presentations. I think there have been, the discussant did a good job, and the presenters in summarizing some of the key things that have come out of this discussion. Just some key words from my side that are collected. The terms such as solidarity, resilience, governance, food, RCT, mobility, humility are some of the things that are very much loaded and resonate with the topic that we have been discussing. And we hope that you found this experience enriching. And we hope as well that we are building a community of learning and practices around this issue of you know, we all agree that there is no barrier between urban and rural. It's a continuum, and in the context of COVID-19 is more so relevant. So we hope to see you very soon in the next webinar. So it's for me just an opportunity to thank all my colleagues and friends and all of you for contributing, either presenting, discussing, contributing through the chat bar, and all the discussion that we follow. We leave it here, Camilo, for you to close the session, or for Grace to take it over. Thank you, Camilo.
Thank you, Remy. So just as clarification, our moderator, Grace, had a connection problem, so that's the reason I took on the role. But yes, I would like to close this webinar announcing our next session that will take place the next Thursday, the 28th of May. So yeah, you will receive this information soon, and also the recording of this webinar as well as the presentations of the speakers. Thank you all for joining today, and I wish you all yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Bye bye.